I guess the story of the day is Frank Reich was hired as head coach of the Panthers, right? So Nathaniel Hackett, offensive coordinator of the Jets. Obviously, everybody thinks, well, Aaron Rodgers coming. But Frank Reich hired. Why did you put down that Mike Silver is ticked off?
See, now we're bringing the listener behind the curtain. This is an inside joke. Obviously Frank Reich was hired. He's white. Steve Wilkes wasn't hired, and he's not white. So my thing is the countdown to Mike Silver's pissed off tweet, which I'm sure has already happened.
The meltdown?
Yeah.
The meltdown? Yeah. Just so you know that Frank Reich did play for the Carolina Panthers back in 1995. Wow. Remember, that was when their expansion team. I think he was their first quarterback that they signed. Right? So the question becomes, like Frank Reich, who, of course, is he's as a head coach. Okay, as a head coach, he was a head coach of the Colts, but Andrew Luck was his quarterback. Right? Then he had Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Sam Ellinger. Right? He had a laundry list of dudes as his quarterback. Previous to that, they won the Super Bowl. Remember, that was when his quarterback was also Carson Wentz, and then Carson Wentz went down, and he replaced him with Nick Foles. So this leads us to the question: we all believe that guys generally, it's a general statement, generally, they bring in somebody who they've worked with before. That happens everywhere I've ever been. We're like, man, why'd they hire that guy? Like, oh, they're boys. They worked together before. But I don't think it's Wentz. I don't think it's Matt Ryan. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett's a maybe as a backup. But what does this mean in terms of starter? Does that mean they keep Sam Darnold? Right? You got a quarterback whisperer with Sam Darnold. They do have some investment in him. I think what's more likely is they draft a quarterback or develop a quarterback. Or, they got the third string quarterback who is hurt all year, who they may want to develop there. But it's a really interesting thing that they have with Frank Reich, where a lot of people like the overall talent of the Carolina Panthers and think they're not that far away. Can Frank Reich be the guy? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. But they're not bringing in Baker after Baker was already there this year and got beat out. What does it mean? He's also, this may be far afield. Frank Reich is a super devout Christian. When I think of somebody who is that level of preachy and would be a fit, Derek Carr is a guy who is who I think this past weekend even spoke at a church. But that's the breadcrumbs we get on what quarterbacks are going where. Carolina, not a major market player, but in a division where you got to figure if you get the right quarterback, you get the right mix, you can compete for a championship, considering Tampa won the division but was under 500, and now they've cut most of their roster. So, and then, of course, we look at the lines and the movement there. Pat Mahomes met with the media. He seemed to be walking fine, and he's okay. We saw the new look Lakers. As Anthony Davis is back. Rui Hachimura is back. And then you get the Jets thing. DB, what do you think of what do you think of the Frank Reich hire in terms of what it means in quarterback movement?
Yeah, really interesting. It also makes me think that the Panthers feel like they are closer to winning now than than maybe a rebuild to try to start from scratch. Maybe they liked what they, had with Sam Darnold over that last stretch and feel like, they're going to exhaust every single option. That's what I took it as. That the success that you had with, Phillip Rivers, maybe that can translate in this scenario.
In terms of just being I'm interested in the Sam Darnold thing. There are signs of, I remain the last stockholder, right? Where I'm like, man, everybody else has sold their stock, and I'm like still holding on to Geno Smith had a great resurgence here later in his career. Maybe that's what we'll see. But when you look at all the quarterbacks available, when you look at all the quarterbacks available, outside of Jacoby Brissett, who you'd bring in as a backup, none of them really make sense in this one in terms of guys he's worked with before.
No, and there's the other factor of Carolina picks 9th in the draft. And in the mock drafts that I see a lot, there is Carolina trading up in that spot. So maybe that's their line of thing. But the Darnold thing, who they'd have to re-sign, is the one that I actually think that it makes sense for the track record of Frank Reich, and heck, try to squeeze what you can out of it, and maybe the guy that you know the most, and you think that Frank Reich can get that out of him, that could be the option. And just of what Frank Reich has done and what he's used to. Maybe they just chose the wrong guys in Indianapolis, and maybe Darnold won't be the guy in Carolina, but that just seems to be along the lines that they're going. Because honestly, the way that they played down the stretch, and their defense has a bunch of really good pieces. It's why they didn't want to trade Brian Burns at the trade deadline. DJ Moore stayed on offense, but they seem to have more of a physical running game with Dante Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. So you've got pieces there that I think that they liked moving forward, and now you bring in Frank Reich to make sure that your quarterback position is fixed.
Jay Stu, what do you think?
Oh, man, I don't know much. I leave this stuff to you guys, but I am interested in this. I don't know much about how Frank does in that market and with that team, but is this where Carson Wentz makes his 4th NFL stop? As soon as the Commanders do what they do with him, does Reich bring him in? Do you see him being a Panther? Maybe not immediately, but soon thereafter. And another question for you guys. What does this mean for Steve Wilks? Is he just going to go be a defensive coordinator somewhere, or does he get hired in this cycle?
No. I mean, he got the job in Arizona. He didn't have a great roster, a good offensive line, but it was bad. And I thought he did a reasonably solid job with Carolina, but he had a 2-month audition, and for whatever reason, they chose to bring in offense. That could very much just be a circumstance of, hey, we've only had defensive guys in here. We really got to figure out the offense, and that's what we go with. But I think, Frank Reich has similar experience, if not better. I just don't think Steve Wilks becomes a head coach, and maybe through no fault of his own, but this is a little bit like what we talked about yesterday, where when you don't bring your own guy with you, it's a good sign that guy can't play. When Steve Wilks, who came from Carolina to Arizona, gets the interim job with Carolina where he has sweat equity, and he gets a look but doesn't get the job, and they finish decently, I think that's telling you, whether or not it's real or imagined, it does seem to tell people, guy's a great guy, just not a head coach. Guy's a great guy, just not a head coach.
Sam Darnold in his final starts for the Panthers had an awful final week. But in the 5 starts that he had when he ended up taking over in November, had a passer rating over 100 4 times. So there's enough there for the Panthers to be like, all right, let's maybe figure out a way. Let's maybe try to bring him back. Maybe you don't use that first round pick on trading up and trying to get a quarterback, because there's likely not going to be one available where they pick at number 9. But he wasn't the Sam Darnold that we like to say Sam Darnold about.
No, listen, again, me, Beyer. I actually really like Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
I think he's got, I've always thought he had, he never had a particularly good roster, particularly good coaching but at some point you can't put the blame elsewhere. Or is it Matt Corral? Are they all in on Matt Corral being the guy who eventually, after missing this year, comes in and takes over the job? I don't know. I don't know.
I think that the investment in quarterbacks outside of the first round is I just don't think that you have to make a commitment at that point. Like, there is no guarantee that that player gets a shot. And I'm all right. Like, if somebody else outplays them, like there's not the, hey, we gotta get this guy some reps. I would almost even say, Doug, honestly, outside of the first 15 picks of the first round at times, which is why I didn't think Jordan Love was the necessity for Green Bay of what are you going to do with Rodgers when you have Love? Like, if Love never played, that means Rodgers was playing that well, and
sure,
so be it. And so I feel the same way with about second and third round picks. And if there's enough there for Carolina to want to bring Darnold back, then go right ahead. But I don't think that there's, it would obviously be, and I'm not saying that you're not saying this, but it would obviously have to be a competition for Corral to try to win a job, because they're just not going to hand it to him.
Yeah, I don't know what, like that would scream to me that Reich had some sort of knowledge of Corral. When you sit down, you got to have like, what's your plan at quarterback? Like, hey, I really like Sam Darnold. I think, it doesn't make a ton of money, and we can extend him so he doesn't make a ton of money. And if you guys like Corral, we'll work with him. It's got to be an overall plan thing. But the one thing about Reich is he is seen as kind of a quarterback whisperer. And if they feel like there's something there with Darnold and he can only grow it, that would make sense. Darnold's still not old. Like, he's not 30 years old. Right? He's like 27. It's crazy. So still plenty of juice in that tank if that's what they see. And I'm with you. You did see marked improvement in solid play at the end of the year. It's interesting because Carolina's a team that one of those markets we don't talk a ton about, but here's a division which is really down. Previously, it had been the best division in football, and it does feel like that Carolina has probably the best overall group of talented players, that quarterback quality coaching consistency away from making that jump, even though they trade away Christian McCaffrey midseason.